Hey, Trevor Matthews here with another morning coffee with Trevor. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me, have a conversation, and really get some coffee into you. I love my morning coffee, and I really hope that over the last few days that you learned a few things, and I learned a bunch of stuff for sure. Yeah, so it's been a fantastic couple of days. I've definitely been learning a bunch of stuff, getting a lot of feedback from everyone, and a lot of questions coming in. So it's great. Morning, Joel, Noah. How you guys doing?
Hey Trevor, what's up?
This is it, man. Got my morning coffee, and ready to get a conversation going with everyone. How you been?
I'm good. I'm good. I think I missed yesterday one. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
missed. But I looked at the YouTube, the recording.
that's all good. It's all good. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
man.
good morning. So hopefully we can share some knowledge, and I can learn from you all, and you can learn from me as well. Hey, Ruben. Hey, Victor. Hey, Noah. So the last couple of mornings, we talked about, got into contamination a little bit. Yesterday, we talked a bit about superheat. Today, I think unless anybody has any questions, we'll get into floodback. I did have one question from yesterday's morning conversation about performance charts, because we did get into performance charts and operation envelope when we were talking about overheating, because high compression ratio leads to overheating and leads to issues in the system, in the compressor. And they asked, like, where do I find the performance charts? And so you do have to spend a little bit of time to find it. And I'm not going to go into a presentation how to show you, but the best place to go would be to either on Copeland mobile app, and get into there, and then there you find the exact compressor you're working on. Like, so you put the model number of that compressor in, and then you go to performance. And in performance, there's going to be, I think, rated performance, dynamic performance, and then performance charts. Then you can go in there and see it. You also can go on Emerson's website and go into something called OPI, and then you can go into there, put the compressor model number. It's a little bit more, takes a little bit more work, but you can find them in there as well. And then for the Bitzer one, you go to the Bitzer software, and then same thing, when you go in there, you click on the semi-hermetics, we'll say, or if it's screw compressor, whatever compressors you're working on, you click on the find the model number of that specific screw compressor. And then up in the top bar, there's going to be like, it's going to look like a little sheet. You click on it, and it's going to drop the performance chart down for you. So it's a little bit of a learning curve. You need to figure it out, and you need to play and do it yourself to figure it out. After you do it a couple times, just like refrigeration, check in superheat, you do it a couple times, you start to learn how to do it properly, and put the gauges on the right spot and where to do it at. So it's important to do that. If anyone does have questions and they don't want to unmute themselves, you can just throw it in the chat box to me. It's totally fine. I totally understand if you want to throw it in the chat. But today we're going to talk a little bit about floodback and some of the causes of floodback, and why you really need to understand what's happening inside the system when you're having a floodback. The big thing that I've noticed over the years of training, and even me when I was in the field, my 10 years, 11 years in the field, I didn't really know the difference between liquid flooding, flooded start, slugging, oil slugging. Like, I didn't know. I would say it's liquid. And I still hear this all the time. It's liquid. And until I was, when I worked at Copeland and I worked with some of the gurus, they were like, Trevor, there's a difference. And this is what most technicians don't know, the difference between a lot of them will say it's a floodback, or it's just like a electrical failure. But what caused the electrical failure? It's the same thing. I didn't know the different mechanical failures from the different causes of liquid getting back to the compressor. Because I say it was liquid, and yes, it was liquid, but it could have been oil, it could have been refrigerant, and it's important to understand those differences. So when we talk about liquid floodback, it's anytime that compressor is running. The compressor is running, and liquid refrigerant makes its way back to that compressor. And the compressor is running, and it just can't boil off either in the compressor, because if you're in a semi-hermetic, and especially like a 3 or 4 or 60, you have the the motor end, and it's really warm. So if you get small little bit of liquid coming back, it's going to boil that off, and you're not going to have any damage really happening. When the damage does happen is when you get a lot of that refrigerant back. And what refrigerant will do, it will start to displace the oil. And when the oil starts to become displaced, that's when you start to get issues inside the compressor. Morning, Bill. What's happening, brother?
Hey, what's up, man?
This is it. Getting a conversation going about liquid floodback right now. How you been, brother?
Doing good. I woke up and I decided to skip my morning workout because I woke up late. So I'm like, I'm going to skip this and go have coffee with Trevor.
Oh, man, that means a lot to me, brother. It means a lot to me.
So far, I don't regret it.
Thanks, man.
I was actually catching up on some RSES reading material last night.
Nice.
Mostly about like desiccants and dryers. Desiccants and then also ultra like low temp coolers.
Yeah.
I didn't realize this. And this document that I was reading is probably a little bit dated, but I was reading in here that in certain lab conditions, we have actually come close to absolute zero, negative 469 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that.
Yeah.
Have you ever delved into ultra low cooling or anything like that when you're in your experience?
Yeah. Personally, I've only been on one or two systems with it. I didn't even actually work on them. I was there with another journeyman, and I worked on one in school. I didn't work on it actually. They had one at the school, and it went down to minus like 90 or something, minus 80.
Is that all Cascade systems?
Yeah. Cascade. So you use two different refrigerants, and they're real small, like small little boxes. Blood banks use them a lot, and you'll
How thick
see
are the walls on something like that.
Well, in those fridges, like I don't really remember, 6 inches. Some of them are thick. They are really thick, maybe even bigger than 6 inches, depending on how cold it is. I don't know all the materials inside them, to be honest with you, Bill, but I have a lot of friends who worked a lot on them, especially at the blood banks and stuff, and working with those low temp. So you have a little small system, usually critically charged cap tubes in them, and then cascade system. So you have a high temperature refrigerant, and then it cools the other refrigerants, kind of like a condenser evaporator, and then that drops that pressure temperature. I think it's maybe R23 they use for the low temp side. I'll have to look that up, or R maybe 123. I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. It's been a while since we looked into that. But what's great about refrigeration, there's so much to learn, and even in that book, you're like, oh, it's a bit dated. Well, refrigeration is really refrigeration. It's not like I read the Copeland manual from 1979, and the stuff still relates today, and which is so amazing about that. So good on you for continuing to develop yourself, Bill. You know what I mean? And that's what it's all about in our trade. We were talking yesterday about how you can do get the same result, but do it differently in refrigeration. You know what I mean? When you're troubleshooting, everyone troubleshoots a bit differently. Some are a bit more effective than others, or quicker, but you get the same results, at the end of the day. And it's learning all those different tips and tricks to be more effective yourself as a technician in the field.
Now, are you one of these diagnosticians that like to go in and try to, because I was listening to the Advanced Refrigeration podcast with you and the boys from I don't know, about a week or two ago, roughly.
Yeah.
And I remember you guys had a part of your discussion was about troubleshooting and the various steps you take in troubleshooting. Are you one of these guys that tries to do everything systematically the same way every time, like Kevin?
You should. Like for me, because I didn't before, my first 5-6 years, every service call, I'd go in and look at a different approach. Well, it's still supermarket refrigeration, still a rack or a parallel system. And I was going in different every time, and then I would miss things. You know what I mean? So I would be like, okay, I fixed the problem, but I missed two other things. Okay, that the honeycomb was still dirty. You know what I mean? Or the coil was still dirty or something like that. So you really need to have a process. And when you do, you don't miss anything, or you shouldn't miss anything. And over time, you check off all the boxes. And then at first you have I had a checklist, and it was a big checklist. but over time that checklist will get smaller because you don't need to check certain things like, okay, all the lights are on, you just walk by right quick. You don't need to check that off the list. You know what I mean? Oh, I can feel the fans running and things like that. So you get better at your systematic approach and you get quicker. It's like any repetitive thing, over time you do it, you get quicker and you learn how to do it systematically. And I think that's the best approach, because then you can confidently say, I didn't miss it. Even if you didn't understand it perfectly, at least you checked it and you said, okay, I seen that the fans were moving. I didn't check exactly that it's 400 CFM or whatever the airflow is in that case, but I knew there was airflow. You know what I mean? Then you can dive it in deeper. Like, oh, I got airflow at the case, so that's good. And it's cold. Okay, so this case is okay. Because you can walk in the supermarket, you can walk along all the cases and be like, okay, this whole section is off. Is it in defrost or is the fans not working? So then you got to start thinking there. But before you start putting tools on and gauges on system, you should assess your site. All my good buddies that are experts in troubleshooting and in refrigeration, when they get a new store, for example, they'll go up to the mechanical room and they'll draw out the whole store in their notepad. They'll take a half an hour. So they know where all the cases are. So when they get down to the floor, they don't have to walk back up or spend 35 minutes walking around the store to find, okay, here's system 6. They'll write it all down in their notepad and it'll make them quicker. Yes, it takes a half an hour and you got to spend some time to do that, but it's going to make them quicker in the long run. And then they take their systematic approach when they come in each time. Okay, talk to the store manager, go talk to that produce manager, a meat manager, find out, ask questions. We're detectives as service technicians. It's no different if you're in HVAC as well. You go in and you talk to the manager. Okay, talk to the ladies or gentlemen that are working in the office. Has it always been cold here? Has it never been cold here? Does it get warm in the middle of the day and cold in the evening? Ask these questions. Oh, I have a heater under my desk all the time. I'm cold all the time. Well, maybe you have an airflow issue somewhere. You know what I mean? Maybe someone shut the vents on them. Maybe there's no vents, So you got to think about all these stuff and you take a lot of notes, That's something I didn't do when I started out. I didn't take a lot of notes. And then over time, I started writing in the logbooks, and I was adamant of putting what I've done in logbooks to log what I did. Because if that next technician came back and he looked and there's nothing in the logbook, because this happened to me so many times, well, what did they do? I know the manager said somebody was here this morning and I'm on call that night. I don't know what they did. They didn't put any notes anywhere. So that really helps the next person when you're logging what you do. A lot of people don't log because they don't know what they did, maybe. Or they're scared that someone will think, well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, that's how you learn, and you got to work as a team. The best companies I worked at maybe didn't have the best management team or they were micromanager, but when I worked with the guys and the techs and the people, we shared ideas, we helped each other out. And that was one thing that a lot of the guys did, was we wrote down what we did, or at least leave your name so we can call them and they'll say, call me, and I'll let you know what you did. But I was always adamant about writing what I did. As I start to get more experience, because I know if I made a mistake, somebody else can at least go back and change. Say I change a TX file, they can go back and turn it back. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of like logbooks and like writing things down, early on when I was like really new and really green, I'd carry a little notepad, almost like a journal with me, and I would get these random curiosities of whatever I saw. If I was curious about it, I would go home, research it, and eventually I would figure it out if I didn't figure it out in the field. But the point of that story is I would write these aha moments in this book of like, oh, today I realized how a TXV works. And I would kind of write brief notes on it or something, just things along the line that were like just, light bulb going off in my head. And I wrote them down so I would never forget them. And I don't know if I've ever actually opened that book back up, but anyways.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you did or not. It's at least that next step, you're writing it down, because we have thoughts all the time. You think, I'm in bed, I think all the time, and I have a notebook there sometimes and I write it down. And then sometimes I get like a little displacement and I think of something like, oh, this is a great idea for a video, or this is a great idea to talk with technicians about, and I don't write it down and I forget it in the morning. So no different if you're in the field, you should be writing that. You should have a journal. Like I had a journal at the end of my, when I was in the field, but when I had that journal, anytime I could look back and review, there's so many good little tips and tricks. I might have wrote like 10 pages of stuff and I might only get one good tip out of that, but I've learned a lot. And I have stacks of books. that I've wrote in over the years that I probably could write a book from all the different little tips and tricks on different equipment I work on, different people I talk with, different manufacturers I work with, right? And it's important to do that.
And read those.
And it's helpful because you can't remember everything. After 6 months and you've been at one job site, you can't really remember, what did I do there? I remember I did that with something to do with the drain line on that package unit. What was it? You know, and then it kind of, okay, let's look back. I know I did. Okay, here it is. And it just helps you remember some of that stuff, I feel, anyway.
I'm looking at these compressors in your background, some sort of rack system I've never seen before.
Yeah, this is from a company here in Brantford where I live. It's called Keep Right Refrigeration. Great company, great team there. And they call these system, I think this one's a link system. And yeah, a lot of fun there. These are low temp. It's low temp application. You can see little valves on the side. They're injection valves, DTC valves on the side of these ones. So
that's what that solenoid's for then.
Yeah, well, that's actually a metering device. It's not I don't think you can see solenoids on there. So the right there.
Like down in the down towards the base, like right above the crankcase heater. Looks like some sort of solenoid, maybe. Is it a solenoid? Or is that a
right there. So that's the OMB, I think. That's the, so I don't see my
OMB.
Yeah, so that's an oil level controller. So to make sure you maintain a proper oil level, if it's the you got to keep the right oil in the compressor.
It helps.
Yeah. Let's get back to floodback. So anytime that compressor is running and liquid makes it back to the compressor while it's running and it starts to displace the oil, you're going to get floodback, and that's going to cause damage. And we all know that liquid refrigerant is a good solvent, it's a good cleaner, and it's going to wash away the oil. Inside a compressor, you need oil everywhere. So you need it on the rings, in the cylinders, in the bearings. You need oil everywhere, and oil travels with the refrigerant through the system. But when you have floodback happen, you have that liquid coming back, it starts to wash it away. And then what you get is bearing wear, it's called. Because it doesn't happen right away. It's not like you get floodback happening and all of a sudden the compressor fails. It starts to cause damage and a little bit damage here, and it wears the bearing more and more. And in a scroll compressor, when it comes back in the crankshaft of the scroll compressors, it's a hollow crankshaft, and it has two flinger feeds at the bottom. So as that compressor is spinning at 3,500 RPM, centrifugal force and two feet or flinger feeds suck up the oil, and that oil makes its way to the main bearing and the dry bearing and bushing and oils it and keeps that bearing good. But if you have refrigerant coming back, displacing the oil, by the time it gets to that last bearing, which is the main, the drive bearing and bushing, you have no oil there for lubrication. And we know, like, if you have no oil, say in your car, you drop the oil in your car, you get a seized engine. No different in a compressor. It'll lead to a seized bearing, which then will lead to potentially electrical failure if you don't fix the problem. Damage already happens. Like, the damage happens for sure. Will the compressor continue to run? For sure. Scrolls are rock solid on that. Same with semi-hermetics. They still can take it and they'll still run. But over time, if you leave it happen, especially small amounts, it'll start to wear the bearing more and more until the rotor starts to touch the stator, and then you get electrical failure. And I've seen this time and time again when I used to work at Copeland doing inspections, where it'll have electrical failure, you have a burnout, but something caused that. I talked about that even on day one with our coffee chats, where that you get an electrical failure, but it was caused by a mechanical failure. 80% of the time, that's a mechanical failure that caused that electrical failure. And refrigerant floodback happens from many, many different things. Because in the evaporator, what you want is to boil off. You know, you want to boil off, you want to absorb the heat of the product, of the people in the room. You want it to absorb. And so it starts to boil off. And by the time it gets to your metering device, so your bulb or your TX, you should have superheat. You know, so you should, that's the whole point of a TX valve, is to have superheat. So you don't get liquid back to a compressor. Whole point of a TX valve. And well, it meters the stuff in too, but you want to make sure you have no liquid going back, because the most efficient evaporator would be a flooded evaporator, because you get, you know, because that liquid is going to have way more energy than vapor. But you can't have liquid inside your compressor. And if you have liquid making it back, you start to get, or that evaporator doesn't boil it off, you start to get liquid back. So it could be from fans not working, could be dirty coil, it could be wrong fan blades, wrong motors, but there's so many different things that it could be, right? Who has experienced floodback before? Anybody ever go up to a system and put their temperature probe and gauge on and look at it and like, oh, I don't have any superheat here?
I think I've come close, but not. I still feel like I didn't actually have liquid going into a compressor, but I have changed a couple of compressors that I'm pretty sure were pumping liquid just based on the amount of damage inside, but I didn't catch it beforehand.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else experience a floodback happening in systems?
Yeah, I think I experienced that already, Trevor. I think I experienced Blowby, but it was afterwards I got it. Wasn't there at the point in time. But afterwards, when I did all the checks, I realized what had happened.
Yeah. So Blowby is different than floodback, but on a rack, I know you work on a lot of supermarket stuff. You will see, and I've seen it a lot, if you ever walk into a rack room and you see an end bell of a compressor, especially medium temp compressor, and it is covered in ice, usually that the floodback is happening. Or you can watch one of the suction lines. You have all the suction lines there, and all of a sudden one is just frosted right up, and you got a whole bunch. That the chances are high that is floodback. But what you need to do is you need to check that compressor superheat. Yeah, go ahead.
I think most times you get that when like the walk-ins. Sometimes the supermarket personnel, they're in the walk-ins, they working in it. Sometimes they have access to the evaporator fan switches, and they take off those switches, have the refrigeration working. That's most times they get that type of problem. Yeah.
Well, they'll go in, and I've seen this too. They'll shut them off, turn it off, and they don't turn them back on. Or because some stores would try to wash out their coils in the meat departments, things like that, and they would shut them off and not turn them back on. And I've seen them even in walk-ins where you should have a solenoid. You open the door, the solenoid cuts, pumps down the circuit. I've seen where people installed no solenoid there. So you open the door, the fan shut off, right, on the freezers, but it doesn't pump down. It doesn't have a solenoid. So you would instantly start to get liquid back to the compressor. But there's a lot of heat in your, you have heat in your suction. So sometimes it'll boil off. And then by the time it gets into the end bell, the heat from that stator and that rotor starts to boil it off. But if you start getting more and more, it starts to damage up that compressor and those bearings. So it's something that you need to check, because there's something called evaporator superheat, where you check that right at the outlet of the evaporator. So you get your temperature with your temperature probe, and then you get your pressure, so your SST of that evaporator, and you check it, and you do a conversion. You need to use the dew point of whatever that refrigerant is, so on the PT chart, and then you check it and say, okay, I got 8 degrees superheat. Okay, that's great. But you still need to check it at the compressor, and we call that either compressor superheat or system superheat, because you want to know how much heat that suction line picks up, or how much, or if you're potentially flooding back. And so you need to check it there, right at the compressor. You can't check it only at the evaporator. You check it at the evaporator. Well, my superheat is 8. Well, if you have 150-foot run of suction, well, it's not going to be 8 at the compressor. It could be 20 or 30 or 40 degrees superheat at the compressor. But if you check at the evaporator and you don't have any superheat, you definitely want to find out what's causing that. If you get no superheat at the evaporator, you still might get a little superheat at the compressor, but probably not. So that's why you need to go to the compressor, get your suction pressure and temperature right at maybe 6 inches from the compressor, as close to the compressor as possible. And you do your superheat calculation there as well. So now you have 2 different superheats. You have evaporator or system and compressor superheat. And this gives you an idea if you're flooding back, because compressors are the heart of the system. If you start getting flood back, you're going to get damage to those bearings, and the compressor's not going to last as long. got a question here. I found a compressor failed because of floodback after I cut the compressor open. Then I became critical on checking super. Fantastic. Yes, and you don't know. You don't know, and allow. That's a great example because I've changed lots of compressors and I didn't know I should have been looking inside or figuring out, oh, it's a burnt out compressor or it's a failed compressor. I know the failed compressor, but if you don't know why that failed, how long till that next one goes in? And this is what's happening out there. And it doesn't matter what compressor manufacturer it is. It could be any one of them. Danfoss, Bitzer, Copeland, Bach, whoever it is. If you're not looking inside, how long, what caused that failure? Oh, I think it might have been the relay. Oh, my superheat, I had a plug condenser. So it must have been because of the plug condenser, but not necessarily. I've seen compressors over the years fail or have issues, floodback, flooded starts, overheat, and contamination. So 4 different mechanical issues. And the one that took it out was the floodback one that took it out. But over the years, it had all those different mechanical failures. Unless you open it up, you don't know exactly which one was the one that laid it to rest. That makes sense. You can have multiple mechanical issues in one compressor because over the years, if someone comes, oh, it was tripping off on the high limit. I cleaned the condenser. Oh, it's working fine now. The pressures are good. So there's some damage from overheat. And then another time, okay, they shut the fans off in the case on the condensing unit and the coil froze up. Well, then it had some floodback. And okay, I come wash out the case and I made sure they didn't turn the fans off anymore. So that then that compressor's running again. But each time this happens, it's reducing the life of that compressor. And I've heard this from people lots. Oh, the compressor's old and worn out. Well, the compressor's not old and worn out. The compressor is damaged from years of abuse. So yes, do you have to replace it? Maybe. And it's better to be proactive than reactive with your customers. And this is what you need to be doing. You got to talk to them. Some customers, if you got a good enough relationship with them, they will do the replacements because they'll believe in you and trust you because you want to do best by the customer. It's not like you want to go out there and try to take advantage of them. You shouldn't. There's no reason why. You want to help them. You want their system to last as long as possible because there's so many customers out there that want your help. And there's so many customers out there, you can go find work really anywhere. And by doing a good job, that's where you get more business. You get people talking about you. You know how great it feels when you get your manager calls you up and say, you know what, you just had 2 calls this week from customers saying that you did such a great job. They want you to come back there. Like that was the best feeling I've had in the field when that happened, and then I go back and see that customer and, I'm all smiles and they're all smiles. They're like, oh, we're really thankful that you're back here again. So it's a good feeling. Other things that can cause floodback is, dirty filters, fan blades, anything where it's going to not let you boil off that refrigerant, unless you're talking about critically charged system with cap tubes and stuff. If you overcharge them with refrigerant, it's going to cause floodback. And floodback is different in air-cooled compressors compared to refrigerant-cooled compressors. Air-cooled compressors, you get major floodback either by refrigerant. You're going to get a slug. With refrigerant cooled, it's you're going to get bearing wear because air cooled, the suction and the discharge go right into the head. So that suction comes right into the head, and then you're trying to compress liquid. Where in refrigerant cool, it comes back and starts to wear the bearing. Got 2 minutes left here. Anybody have any dire questions for morning coffees with Trevor?
I have one question. When you finally get to the end of this series of morning coffee with Trevor, where am I supposed to get my updated refrigeration education from?
Well, I got some stuff on my website. Like I got some trainings coming up. I got a scroll training. I got 4-week masterclass. I got all the podcasts I've done, even done with the HVAC overtime team on my website. So anyone can check that stuff out just keep looking up. I got more stuff coming down the line. I'm working on some stuff with some great influencers out there, like Chris and one of your good buddies. And trying to shoot.
I've heard whispers about what you guys have in mind.
Yeah,
sounds exciting.
Yeah, so just trying to get the information out there and just really help educate technicians out there and hopefully make a bit of a difference. So,
are you ever going to get into doing maybe your own podcast? Something along these lines of?
I think so. I think if people are interested in it, I love sharing my knowledge and information and talking with people on there. So maybe this is the start of it. Maybe this
Nice.
is the start of it. Well, it's 7 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining me for a coffee, and hopefully I see you tomorrow. Let's get a conversation going.